Hi, my name is Phil Dean, and I am reading Thingamanose by Lynne Hudson. The Thing Up Rose's Nose. Rose pointed to a thing that was moving about. It was making a home in her slippery snout. It's a Thingamanose! But her mother and father dismissed the girl's cries, thinking her grumbles were white little lies. Don't be so silly, Rose. Stop telling fibs. A nostril is not a place anything lives. But Rose still insisted that the Thingamanose existed. Believing their wishes were being ignored, the frustrated parents breathed deeply and roared. Put on your coat, Rose. We're taking you out and getting a doctor to look at your snout. Then off they all trotted, the parents and Rose, and the doctor examined and studied the nose.
It's certainly blocked, but I can't see quite where. There's a definite blockage of something up there. It'll work its way out. It won't be in a hurry. It'll take its own time, but there's no need to worry. But there's no Thingamanose.
Thingamanose plops out. Rose lay in her bed. As she started to doze, she heard a peculiar sound in her nose. Chip, chop, chip, chop. Rose sat bolt upright and she rubbed at her snout. You wouldn't believe what was trying to get out. Then she ran to the bathroom to study her nose. Was that the leg of a Thingamanose? Rose reached for the limb, but it quickly withdrew, and all that remained was solidified goo. Rose went back to her pillow and tried not to think about what she had seen on her trip to the sink. Chip, chop, chip, chop. Rose started to panic. Her face turned bright red. There is something living inside of my head. She raced to the mirror and, to her alarm, observed, dangling out of her nostril, an arm? It was slimy and thin, and it had the odd hair, and Rose gaped open-mouthed as it waved in the air. Then a head slithered out. It was horribly mean, and ugly and warty and gooseberry green, and it grinned at poor Rose with a grimace so foul. Then she let out a terrible, petrified howl. Whatever is the matter, dear? Thingamanose is trying to get out. It's tunnelled its way through the slime in my snout. Will you stop telling tales? At that very same moment, it fell from her nose. It plopped onto the floor. It unwound like a hose. From a wet, slimy bundle so seemingly small, the creature expanded to 6 inches tall. Mum! Dad! Come quickly! The Thingamanose fell out! Rose studied the thing as it stood on the floor. She hadn't seen anything like it before. It looked back at her and it hissed and it sneered. Then it scuttled away and the thing disappeared. The next morning, Rose walked in the kitchen and greeted her ma, then sat down for breakfast alongside her pa. Thingamanose, I'm happy to say, fell out in the night and then went on its way.
Stop telling stories, will you desist? Thingamanose does not exist.
But go and get ready for school. Rose picked up her school bag and skulked out through the door, but Rose hadn't noticed the trail on the floor that led to her backpack and into its sack, the very same bag that was now on her back. The school trip. Today was the day that the kids of Class 4 were to visit a firm for its annual tour. Hello to you all, and for me it's a thrill to welcome you all to this grand pepper mill. Follow me please, and I'll show you around, and we'll see how a marvellous pepper is ground. Ping, ping, ping. The class ushered on through a tall wooden door, met a massive machine with an ear-splitting roar. It pummeled and pulverised, spitted and spewed as it turned pepper plants into seasoning for food. Poof! In the midst of the classmates, this chattering herd, inside Rose's bag something horrible stirred. Thingamanose slid down to the floor, then it looked around the room and began to explore. What it wanted to find, where it needed to doze, was a big, hairy snout or a dribbly nose. Then it spied the machine and grinned ear to ear. Thingamanose had a horribly wicked idea. It stamped on a switch. What a dastardly deed! The left side said slow, and the right side full speed. It jumped up and down, had a twist and a fiddle, knocked the switch to full speed from its place in the middle. The machine began shuddering, the temperature rose, and steam tumbled out of the overflow hose. Faster and faster the wheels and cogs turned, and more pepper plants cheerfully churned, until the device blew its top, kaboom! Then spluttered and hissed as it scattered the room with a peppery mist. Out came the tissues and wet noses blew. Then all of the kids of class 4 went achoo! Ooh. Thingamanose jumped down to the ground, and it sniggered and sneered as it looked all around. It scuttled along with a fidgety stoop as it made its own way to the back of the group. It studied the children, it slithered past rows, then ran up the child with the ruddiest nose. An unfortunate girl felt a tug on her skirt, and Thingamanose ran up her shirt. The girl turned her head. She looked at her arm. She spotted the thing and cried out in alarm. Ah! It's a monster! Thingamanose jumped, then wove left and right as it ran through the class and then ran out of sight. Will you behave? My dear, there are certainly no scary monsters in here. Now come along to our next destination. Hurry, please, to the packing station. Rose thought as she glared at the mill volunteer, Thingamanose has followed me here. I will catch it as proof, then I'll show all the grown-ups who's telling the truth. The packing room. The class trotted on through a rubbery door to a deck with a view of the packaging floor. Overseeing the room, proudly marching about, was an elderly man with a big hairy snout. And he barked through his nose at the staff in the place, since his nose was the biggest thing there on his face. Get those packages boxed up quick! Thingamanose, who had been lured by the shout, squealed with delight when it saw the big snout. It leaped from the deck, landing on the man's clothes, and tried to climb up into his big, hairy nose. But the hairs were too bushy. The thing had no luck. The higher it climbed, the more it was stuck. The big nostrils tingled and started to twitch. Up went a finger to tackle the itch. Thingamanose was plucked from his beak and launched with a flick and a traumatized squeak. With eyes like a hawk, Rose was searching around for places Thingamanose could be found. Then she heard a faint squeal, and she thought that she saw Thingamanose collide with the door. Rose jumped to the doorway, her bag open wide, hoping to capture the creature inside. But inside struck the thing with a casual blow, batting it down to the level below. The guy turned to Rose with a menacing glare. What was that thing that you battered down there? The little girl stuttered, her cheeks all aglow. Then she mumbled an answer. Thingamanose? What? Thingamanose? What on earth do you mean? You've polluted this room when it has to be clean. I suggest that you leave. Teacher, take her away. Make her stay on the coach for the rest of the day. Rose's cunning plan. The teacher explained as he rubbed at his stubble. Rose, you really are in a whole lot of trouble. When we get back to school, I must ring up your folks and tell them all about this ridiculous hoax. Rose thrust out her lip and it twitched with dismay. Would her parents believe her? No! What on earth could she say? Then she figured, through tears that were starting to sting, she would have to try harder to capture the thing. Sir, I need the toilet. Let back inside, Rose bypassed the loo and crept silently onto the room with the crew, who were carefully repairing the broken machine and removing the peppery dust in between. As she studied the workers, Rose had a thought how Thingamanose could be cornered and caught. If I use them as bait, I can lure it in here. If I make them all sneeze, then it's bound to appear. Rose scanned the room and caught sight of a fan. Just what I need to accomplish my plan. So she slipped through the room, creeping bent and low. She turned on the fan, and it started to blow. Whoosh. First a cough, then a sniff, and occasional wheezing. Achoo! Then suddenly all of the staff began sneezing. Seduced by the noise and the peppery gloom, Thingamanose silently entered the room. Masking her nose while surveying the murk, Rose found a location to linger and lurk. She pulled out her jumper to use as a snare, 'cause Thingamanose must be in here somewhere. Rose waited and waited, her heart beating fast. Concealed in a corner, she crouched when at last she spotted a figure and noticed its height. Then she pounced like a puma and gave it a fright. Swoop! Rose used her school jumper to capture the creature, then raced through the building to rejoin her teacher. At home, Rose faced both her parents, and boy were they mad. Then she offered the jumper to Mother and Dad, and slowly unwrapped it to proudly reveal that she wasn't a liar. Thingamanose was real, but the jumper was empty. Thingamanose was here! Rose whimpered a gloomy reply, then the frustrated youngster proceeded to cry. You, young lady, are grounded forever! Go to your room this instant! Rose sat on her bed, she wiped her red eyes, and she blew her wet nose as she sighed a deep sigh. Thingamanose continued to be, without any proof, a complete fantasy. Then Father approached with a cup in his hand, and he said to the girl, Rose, I do understand that kids often see things, kids often feel imaginary stuff that is clearly not real. Go and get changed. We're having important guests over for supper. No more of this Thingamanose nonsense. But it's real. Curled in a corner, its head on the ground, snoring like thunder, the family hound. And into its snout, as the wary dog dozed, slid the sneaky and slippery Thingamanose. The dinner party. Later that evening, at 6:54, the family heard a loud knock on the door. Come in, welcomed Dad as he ushered inside Mr. Winner, Dad's boss, and his glamorous bride. The guests took their places and Mum served the nosh, arranged with a flourish to make it look posh. But Rose was still angry. She sat there quite cross as she witnessed her dad try to impress his boss. As the diners were chatting, the family pooch jumped up at the table and gave Dad a smooch. But in that split second, the chance had arose for something to slip into Dad's hairy nose. Dad put down his wine glass and seemed quite upset. His big nose was twitching. He started to sweat. Then all of a sudden, he lost his compose as he felt something slithering inside his nose. Ah! Dad tried his best not to have a good pick, but he felt something hard, something slimy and slick. What could be in there? What was this pest? So Dad picked it out right in front of his guest. Dad blurted out in pure disbelief. Mum spat out gobbets of mushed spinach leaf. But no such response from Dad's boss, Mr. Winner. The chief sat there quietly, eating his dinner. Then he calmly put down his knife and his fork and coughed quite politely, preparing to talk. He looked up at Dad and said with repose, "Your hooter has been housing a Thingamanose."
"I told you Thingamanose was real." "Get rid of it!" cried Mum with a panicky shriek as the Dinners grabbed napkins to shove up their beaks. Then Rose and her parents, Dad's boss and his spouse all chased Thingamanose out of the house. So now if Rose sniffles or points at her snout, her parents don't grumble or scold her or shout. They look at her kindly and dare to suppose that their daughter is home to a Thingamanose. The end.